Hello, everybody. Thanks ever so much for the invitation. Thank you especially to Antonia and to her team. I bring special greetings for the Vice Mayor, Hanne Mickelson, in the city of Oslo for urban development. She would like to have been here, but as many senior politicians, she has a lot of other commitments and was more than happy to send me instead, which I'm very pleased for. This is a great initiative, Green City Conference, Green Futures Conference. What a great idea. And it's fantastic to see such a big audience following this. I've been to some similar events like this, not many, because you have such an amazing mixture of people here, experts, businesses, politicians, national, regional, local, even European. And all these stakeholders will help generate the commitment that you will need in Split and the Split region to achieve what you're hoping to. And of course, it's great to be in Split again. This, I think, is probably my 5th visit to Split. This time, for the first time, not as a tourist, but to do some serious work, and I'm very pleased with that. Green capital of Europe. Just think of that. It makes you sweat even more than the warm weather we had yesterday. Next slide, please. I think the one before that, please. Slide before that, please. Yeah, thank you. Right. The Green Capital Award was given to Oslo to celebrate for 2019. I think we received it 2 years previous to that, so we could plan for the event. I have 2 reports with me summarizing what we did and what our ambitions are for the future work, which I'll be happy to give to Antonia and her team after my presentation. The European Union has been running the Green Capital Award scheme since 2006. It was initially set up, as you can see here, from the city of Tallinn. They asked to do this, and the European Commission thought this was a great idea. Oslo applied actually 3 times. So it's worth trying and trying and trying again. And I heard recently that the next winner of the Green Capital Award actually applied 5 times, but they will be celebrating next year. Now, to achieve this is important if you're going to take seriously the invitation from the coordinators here to go in for the Green Capital Award. You have to respond to 12 criteria. Listen very carefully. You can, of course, look it up on the EC website later. Air quality, noise, water, sustainable land use, waste and circular economy, nature and biodiversity, green growth and eco-innovation, climate change mitigation and adaptation, sustainable urban mobility, energy performance, and environmental governance. You were measured on all those 12 criteria. But what this slide shows here, you're not measured just for the status quo. You're measured for what you've done before, where you are now, and where you're heading for. And where you're heading for, they will be really looking for signs of commitment, budgets, political declarations, links, projects that are starting up. When Oslo did this, we scored pretty well on most of the items, but not all. We came 7th place on water, for example, and to deal with that, the city of Oslo is now making a huge investment to connect up to an alternative water supply so that we have a more robust system for the future. Next slide, please. Now, Oslo has transformed a lot, like all our cities have, since the post-war years. We've changed from being originally an industrial city on the peripheral edge of Europe to now a service-based economy. And you can see the slides on the top. What was a busy little motorway junction in front of the city hall with the 2 towers, my office happens to be there, is now an iconic public place. The bottom 2 slides show that what used to be a shipyard right in the center of the city, where the first oil platforms were built in the 1970s, is now a hub for businesses and leisure and housing, and the museum in the front was actually designed by Renzo Piano. So we have a lot to be quite proud of what we've achieved. Next slide, please. Now we have 5 main targets in the climate strategy for 2030. We have a strong political commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2030. We see this as a pretty hairy goal, but we're working for it. Increasing the carbon sinks, reducing the energy consumption from the city, climate resilient city, so that we can withstand the heavy rainfall that we sometimes have and the hot sunny days. We do have them as well. And reduce the carbon footprint of the city. This is a huge challenge given the high level of consumption that we have in Europe as a whole, but not least in the Scandinavian area where incomes are pretty high. Next slide, please. Transport is the highest emitter of climate gases we have in the city. One of the main reasons for this is that hydroelectricity is where we get nearly all our power from in Oslo and in Norway. It's an ironic situation that Norway is Europe's largest producer of gas and oil to the rest of the world, but in fact, all our own electric consumption is from hydropower. This means that the car is our biggest problem. We're also phasing out, or we have phased out almost entirely oil heating in buildings, which are being replaced by either electric or district heating or heat pumps across the city. Next, please. In parallel with all this, in parallel with the financial budgeting, the financial management of the city, we've set up what we call a climate budget. This is designed so that our politicians can follow from one year to the next, sector by sector, how we are actually working towards the 95% goal that is our target by 2030. This gives a central monitoring of progress towards our policy goals. Next, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Car reduction. We have a strong political goal for reducing cars on the road, even though the city is expanding financially and demographically. How are we doing this? We're charging the motorists. We're charging them to drive into the city. We're charging them a lot to park in the city. We're doing what we can to improve all the alternatives, including cycling, buses, the little electric scooters, and of course, walking safely on the streets. And we're doing what we can through the planning system, which is where I belong in my profession, to design out cars. We're designing our cities, we're designing our regions so that we can live without being dependent on cars. Just think of that. How many activities can we actually manage on an everyday basis without using the car? This is what we're heading for. Next, please. We're also reducing emissions from our diggers and our lorries. This is very difficult. This is new technology. This is cutting edge. And we're doing this through giving demands through public procurement, requiring zero emission in all new municipal projects. You build a new school, you repair a road, you have to use climate zero material. This is a huge challenge, but by using our market power as a public procurer, we can actually start to achieve this. And the market actors start to respond in their own private projects as well. It's also been introduced as a planning requirement so that we can actually, when we approve planning permission for a new building, we can add this on as a requirement. Next, please. And we're reducing our waste. We're not producing less waste, but we're using it. We're using the waste. We don't talk about waste. We talk about resources that have gone adrift. Let's try and rephrase it. It's resources that have gone adrift, resources that we should be using somewhere else. We're sorting, we're recycling. We also have a huge incinerator system producing district heating, which keeps our water warm in the flats and heat keeps our houses warm in the winter. Next, please. The value of green space. Like Split, we are surrounded by beautiful landscape. In our case, it's more forest, lakes. We have the sea, we have islands like you do. These are very important and are protected by law. They're protected for the parks and the islands. And these are carbon sinks. These probably have as big an impact as some of the measures to reduce cars in reducing our carbon footprint. They're also extremely important value, as of course it is here, for leisure. We don't have so many tourists as you do, but we have some. And when we tell them to go up into the forest and have a walk, they're surprised because they didn't know how beautiful it was. Next, please. climate adaptation. We don't have the heat problems that you do. I heard that last year it was over 40 degrees here for several days. It's unimaginable for me how you survive. But we do have some very heavy rainfall sometimes. And as you've probably heard, we also have had some floods, not as serious as in Germany last year, but it can happen and it will happen. So we have a systematic way of planning our city, designing our city in phases to manage the high levels of rainwater. Next, please. We're also using a lot of the water capacity that is under the city because it was built over in the past. We're opening up the culverts so that we have streams and waterways which enhance the quality of life and connect the parks and the green spaces that we have. Next, please. And we build on our existing ambitions and political commitments to participation with the wider public. During the Green Capital year, a whole lot of events were set up, especially involving children and local communities and schools, to celebrate the fact that we were a green capital, to explore new ways of sharing our food, doing activities, thinking of how we live, and so on. If you start with the younger generation, there is a chance, a small chance, that the planet may survive. Next, please. There's a little technical break now. This is an illustration which we've been developing through the Eurocities network, which I know Zagreb is a member of. I don't think Split is a member of it at the moment. But the concept is around urban regional collaboration. Now, I know that Split belongs to a big regional area with smaller towns and villages that spread out in each direction. There is a big added value of regional collaboration, and I would recommend this picture to some of your planning colleagues to look at as a basis for strengthening the collaboration between towns, villages, and neighbours in the region. By doing this, there's more chance that Split will be able to reach the goals that you have, because alone, some of these things are impossible, such as the environmental goals, the transport goals, and so on. Next, please. Oslo is on the map behind me. We're surrounded by forest, which we're not allowed to build on. We have the water in front of us, like you do. Of course, we don't build on that. We have a little bit of farmland, not very much, so it's very heavily protected. We're dependent on importing a lot of food in Norway. And we have our urban centres. That's what's left. So all the building we have to do to organise our growth is within the existing built area. This means we cannot expand the size of our cities. Next, please. So we have a city strategy for zero growth in the green belt, carefully organised growth in the older established areas, including the historic city, but also some of the other more sensitive spaces, and prioritising the growth when we can around the public transport nodes. Our regional strategy, which you can see on the right, builds on exactly the same principle. Here we have 23 separate municipalities who have to follow the same goals, and they've agreed to this. Having made that agreement through a regional plan, we now in Oslo have the power to say no to a local authority outside our own area if they have plans to build in the wrong place, whether it's a shopping centre, whether it's a housing area, without public transport. This is very important because it leads to a car-free future. Next, please. This just shows very briefly what the strategic issues are in the city plan. Safe, inclusive, compact urban development, as I was saying just now. Green city and protection of the forest and the sea. Next, please. This is what the seafront in Oslo looks like. It's totally different from Split, I know. I'm sorry, we don't have a Roman palace in our city, but we have some old harbour spaces which have been converted into offices. Luckily, as a capital city in an oil-dependent economy, there's a lot of money around, and these offices are full and very expensive to rent. I won't say any more, but there's a lot of good things to see there. We have the Munch Museum, we have the opera, there's some iconic buildings which you've probably seen in some glossy brochures. Next, please. This is our regional plan, which I mentioned before. I don't think I'll go into detail here, but this material is available for the experts among you, and I hope you'll be able to take it back with you and do come back and ask if there's any questions. Next, please. It says 10:50. Is this 10 minutes or 10 seconds? 10 seconds, 10 minutes, right. Okay, good. Current changes, current charges. Now, Oslo, 30 years ago now, Oslo was a peripheral city in Europe, a long way away, outside the EU, outside the common market. There was a lot of congestion on the roads, a lot of costs. Businesses were struggling to survive. They were being outcompeted by Stockholm, by Copenhagen, by Berlin and Amsterdam. And the unions saw that their jobs were at risk. The trade unions saw that their jobs were at risk. So that the trade unions and the business leaders got together and they talked to their respective political parties on the right and the left. And they said, look, unless we can renew the transport system in Oslo, we're going to be left behind. We're going to be one of those cities that's forgotten because the economy is not going to survive. This was 30 years ago. Sustainability was not on the political agenda. Now, the politicians in Oslo and our region outside went off and they had a think about this and they came back with a plan. And the plan was to write a long list of investment proposals, a package of investments for the whole infrastructure system in Oslo and Akershus, and to fund it with road tolls. Now, Norway has a system, like many other countries, for funding big road investments through tolls, and this is what they used. They were not going to toll segments of road, they were going to toll the entire city. The picture behind me shows the space in front of the city hall, before and after. The before picture shows a big road junction full of cars in 1990. The picture below shows what it looks like today. All that traffic has disappeared. It's disappeared because it's underground. There's a 6-lane motorway underneath that space. That motorway was funded by road tolls around the entire city. Not only that, but the road tolls were enough, there was enough money coming from that for the national government to say, well, that's a pretty big step for the local politicians. We'll put some money on the table too, so there's co-financing. We didn't have EU funding. So as a result of that, the day the tunnel opened, the day the space in front of the city hall became free, the day it started to feel like a summer holiday, then we had to start paying. Before that, it was we weren't charging. It was quite intelligent. This system has now been running for more than 30 years. It's adapted and changed over the years. Now most of the money is going into public transport, supporting the running costs of public transport, investing in new metro lines and trams. The cost has gone up. It is now €4 per drive into Oslo. €4 per drive into Oslo. If you look at that roughly in terms of the median incomes that we have in Norway and here, you could say that's roughly €1 to €2 per drive into Split, which is a lot of money, but it's not impossible to think of if you can see the results. And when we ask people if you think this is a good idea, when you see the results, then they say this is a good idea. So the politicians keep working on it. It gives them the freedom to do what they want. When the Green Party came into power in Oslo 6 years ago, they changed some of this and they introduced a more directed way of using this. So electric vehicles go free, diesel cars have to pay a lot more, and the price is higher during the rush hour. So they're using this now to steer the traffic on the roads. The goal is to reduce the number of cars in total and the CO2. So this is one of our really big success stories. The technology exists. All you app and technology developers, don't worry, it's already there. So Split, you can come up to us, see how it works, and go back home and think of how it can be implemented. The European Union is interested in this, but they're not prepared to impose it, of course. There's no directive on this, but there are possibilities that this kind of action could be funded, partly funded through European funding. Thank you. Next, please. Success depends on good coordination and clear political decisions and funding. You all know that. For us, participation is a strong guarantee of both public support and the quality control of what we're doing and good new ideas. This is why conferences like this are so important, because this kind of participatory exercise gets all the ideas together and people can work things out as a group. Next, please. So altogether, we have actually 4 strategic regional spatial strategies on the road tolls. We have a regional transport authority now. We have a regional plan, which I showed you before. And we also have a regional plan for economic development. All this works very well. And the next slide, please, shows us that, in fact, you can look at the details afterwards if you like. Success. Since 2008, the number of cars on the road in Oslo have remained stable. Since 2008, the population has risen by about 20%. Since 2008, the total economy of Oslo has increased by about 30%. But the number of cars on the roads is stable. How have we achieved this? Through planning, through charging, and through building alternatives. This is our success story, and it should, in the end, lead to a reduction in cars and a reduction in emissions. Next, please. European spatial policy is essential, and this is something that all of you can lean on and say, look, this is what Europe wants us to do. These are directions that we're not just thinking of ourselves. We've seen it in other places, and these are the directions we need to take. Next, please. There are now 3 slides, which I'll just hop through quickly because these are very technical, but urban sprawl is one of the big challenges for urban development, which leads to inefficient use of land, more car use, and a very costly system. There's a lot of data out there now from other countries. I don't know about the Croatian situation. There's a lot of information there showing that this doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's what's happening everywhere. The market is continually driving it, but it doesn't work. It is not sustainable. So somehow you have to work against it. I had a discussion yesterday with a planning expert in Zagreb, and she explained to me that actually the planning law in Croatia allows this to be stopped. The question is whether the local and regional politicians are prepared to take that action. Next 2 slides quickly, and we'll go through to the next one. One more, and the next. Thank you. That's technical details, and I expect that your planning experts will look at them later. Norway applied, together with a lot of other cities in Europe, to be carbon neutral by 2030, and we won. This is really scary. It's not just 95%, but it's now 100%. Next, please. Whoops. I had a friend who studied economics, and he did his final exam, and he failed. Okay. So he studied again the next year. He looked at all the previous exam papers, and he said, and then he went up to the exam again in June the next year, and it was the same questions. And he failed. So he went to the professor and said, look, hang on, what's going on? This was the same questions as last year. I've done all the revision. What's wrong? What are you doing? You're cheating me. He said, the answers are different now. The answers are different now. We're now in a different world. COVID has led to a lot of new mobility patterns, just to name one thing. The war in Ukraine creates refugees everywhere and a fear of war, which you in Croatia understand better than most. The inflationary spiral is increasing poverty across Europe, including many of the people who would like to have holidays here. And it's pushing big investments out of the horizon. And the climate is now collapsing. It's not a crisis, it's collapsing, as the first speaker showed. All this has led, I'm now over time, I'm sorry, but I'll just sneak in 2 more minutes. This has led to major shifts at EU level and national level in every country across Europe. How will cities adapt? How will the new shocks make it harder or easier to achieve the climate goals? This is the big question we're all asking, and this is one of the questions that Split should be looking at as well. Next, please. This is my final slide. I'll say a few things. The choice of tools is very important. There's a lot of available funding and policies now to use. At the European scale, we have not only the main budget, but it's more or less doubled with the recovery fund, the RFF. From what I read, Croatia, I think, is receiving 40 billion euros through this. 40 billion euros, of which a large part is for sustainable transport. That's only the RFF, plus all the mainstream funding. We can add to this 10 million euros from the Norwegian fund, the desk is on the front here, which is also going to Croatia for projects like this. The choice of tools must be made locally. It's up for the city and the region to decide. It's your choice. You know what the problems are. You know what's possible. So it's for you to decide. It's for you to take the responsibility for today's residents and businesses, as well as coming generations. I was delighted to meet the youngest participant when I came in this morning, Eleonora. I think she's only a few months old. She is who we're planning for. Before I wind up, I'd just like to have a final word. I had some discussions yesterday which were very interesting with a lot of people from Croatia and from other parts of Europe. And I became aware that the Croatian people and your politicians have to do more to earn trust in each other. The 2021 EU Rule of Law report highlights corruption as a big challenge in Croatia, as does Transparency International. Without this trust, I would argue that many of the measures that I've described so far today would be very hard to achieve in Split or anywhere in Croatia. A green city must be an inclusive and a trusting city. Thank you very much.